Alright, so today's lecture is going to cover PATA, SATA, SAS, and SCSI. PATA, this is our older technology. We were talking about under standards, ATA standards 1 through 7. Now, PATA uses a ribbon cable. It's an 80 wire, or it can be 40, but those were the older ones. All the newer ones are going to be 80 wire, and a 40 pin connector. The connector is keyed, plugs into the hard drive over here, so that you can't plug it in upside down. It used to be they weren't keyed, and you have this red line that runs down the ribbon cable, and that red line indicated where pin 1 was, and the drive would also indicate where pin 1 was, and you had to match those up. If they didn't match up, your drive was not recognized. The other thing you have on PATA drives is a jumper block, and the jumper block is used to indicate whether or not the drive is master, slave, or cable select. So when you have a single drive, you do not need to jumper it. You put it at the end of the cable, and it's automatically seen as a master by the computer. Now, when you have two drives that you want to put on the chain, because you have daisy chaining with PATA, you're going to have to set one as the master, and there's a chart on here that indicates where you put the jumper on the pins to let the computer know that this drive is master. So you put it at the last end of the cable and then set it as master. The second drive you will put in the middle of the cable and then do the exact same thing per that drive, look at its chart and set it as slave. Put the jumper pin wherever that indicates. And then the third option is cable select. And cable select is a really neat idea that computer manufacturers loved because it made it easier for the 5-year-olds in Malaysia to put the computers together. And cable select allowed you to put the drive on any location on the cable, and everything worked. Now the way that worked was that you still had to have it jumpered, but everything was jumpered exactly the same. All drives were jumpered as cable select, and then you had to use a cable select cable, and it set it on the ribbon. It's a big letters, cable select. The other option that you have to set is in the BIOS. You have to indicate that the interface is set for cable select. And once all three of those things were true, you just plug everything in, and the computer understands which device is master and which device is slave. And generally you were plugging in a CD-ROM and a hard drive, and it would set the hard drive as master and the CD-ROM as slave. And everybody was happy. Max cable length for PATA cables is 18 inches. There is no external PATA technology, internal only, and that is about it for PATA. It's an older technology, it's deprecated, you generally don't see it around anymore, and our max throughput was 133 megabytes per second, and oftentimes we didn't get that. I'd say averages were closer to the somewhere 50 to 70 range, so it wasn't very common to get those kinds of speeds out of PATA. And I was very disappointed when I got my ATA 133 and that didn't get the speeds that I would like. So our next technology is going to be SATA. So if we look on our motherboard, we'll see our SATA ports. SATA is a point-to-point connection, no more daisy chaining. So along with a point-to-point connection, we have no jumpering, we have no worrying about who's where in a chain. It's just plug them in. Now with PATA, you can only have 4 drives max in your computer because you only have 2 PATA connectors and you can only put 2 drives per cable. Well, with SATA, we can have as many as we can fit on the board. So as many connectors as we have on our board, we can put drives in. And then if we would like to expand that, we can add some add-on cards that will give us extra SATA ports. Of course, you know, power considerations and all that, so don't just go crazy. Make sure you have enough power to run all of that, and cooling to cool it all down if you're using mechanical drives. So the SATA cable, you'll notice there's 2 different ones. You have this flat one, and then you have one at 90 degrees. And the reason for that is because you cannot bend a SATA cable at 90 degrees. You will break it. So if you need the cable to go around a corner, you're in a tight space, your computer configuration is such that the drives are facing out towards the front, the side of the computer case, and you don't have enough space to put the cable in, you use a 90-degree cable. Do not bend the cable. The other options we have are things like locking connectors, so that will actually lock it in. And we also have eSATA, so you can see here's an eSATA connector, because the maximum cable length for SATA is 1 meter, and that is long enough for us to have an external option. And it's just a really fast connection, really popular, was really popular for a long time for external hard drives. The other thing about SATA is that it's hot swappable capable, but you need to be very careful with that, because even though it is capable of the technology, the drive has to support it, the motherboard has to support it, and has to be configured for that. The drive has to be configured in AHCI mode or RAID mode in order for that to be possible. So don't just go unplugging your drives. It's not always an option for you. It uses a 7-pin data cable, and this is its data cable, and you can see that it's keyed, it's a little L shape, and it uses a 15-pin power cable. It looks just the same, but it's 15 pins long, so it's a little bit longer. And you can see I have a SATA drive right here, so this is SATA drive interface. Now, we don't have any daisy chaining. Why in the world would we have jumpering? What would this be for? Well, oftentimes with our SATA drives, we would have to set up backwards compatibility. So we have our SATAs 1, 2, and 3, and these are the speeds associated with those different SATA speed or SATA revisions. Now, say I had a motherboard that fell under the ATA 7 standards and had SATA 1, and I bought a SATA 2 drive. Well, I plug that in, and it's not going to work. I know that for sure because it's happened to me. And so what you'll do is you fix the jumpers so that it sets the drive and tells the drive it's SATA 1, and then the drive will operate at SATA 1 and be compatible with your system. Now, not all drives are going to have that. That's not a guarantee that you're going to see that on there, so do try to buy drives that are compatible with your system. Make your life a little easier. Alright, so that's it pretty much for SATA. SCSI is up next. Ignore this picture. I have the wrong one on here. It was supposed to go with my my IDE. This is your PATA connector and PATA drive. This is not a SCSI drive. This down here is a SCSI drive. So here is SCSI connector and the power and the jumper block. So with SCSI, really we're only going to be concerned, there's a lot of SCSI out there, and you can go ahead and Google it and see, pull up the chart on Wikipedia, and you'll see how many revisions of SCSI there have been. It's been around a really, really long time, and so it's gone through many, many revisions. The ones that we're concerned about for the A+ test are SCSI, Ultra 3 SCSI, Ultra 320, and Ultra 640 SCSI. And these are going to use either the 68-pin or the 80-pin connector, and these are the associated speeds with them. It's nice, it's in the name for the most part, except for Ultra 3, 160 megabytes a second. And these are the 3 newest revisions of SCSI. You actually don't see a lot of Ultra 640. They're pretty expensive. SCSI is expensive to begin with, and they're expensive drives. And by the time this was coming out, SAS was already out and making its way through, and people are upgrading to SAS. And there is another revision of SAS that for some reason I don't have on here. There's a 600 megabyte or 6 gigabit per second version of SAS. So it's very comparable with Ultra 640 SCSI. So these are the connectors that you could see with SCSI, and there's a lot of them, and it can be used internally and externally. You can see that these are the external connectors, and then these would be used on the drives. These would be found on the drives for the internal hard drives. Now, the trick with SCSI, the ribbon cable. It is a ribbon cable. It's parallel technology, and you can have up to 16 devices on a SCSI chain. Max. 0 through 15, so 16 total. And each device has to have a device ID. So this is what the jumper block is for on the drives. This setting the jumper sets the device ID. Generally your host controller card, which is the card that you attach the SCSI chain to, runs the SCSI, sets up your RAID. It's a RAID controller card too. These are one of these devices that BYOB comes with option ROM that you have to update its own BIOS. You have to often update that as needed. So the card usually gets ID 7. That's not set in stone. It doesn't have to. It's just the way things have traditionally been done. And then the rest of the devices each have to have a unique ID on the chain. The other thing you have to set with SCSI is termination. And you'll see this green device right here at the end of this cable. And what termination does is it prevents the signal from being reflected back across the cable after it's reached its destination, and maybe for some reason wasn't used or there was some signal left over. It doesn't come back down. You don't want that, because that is going to interfere with other data on the cable if it runs back down. This is parallel technology. It's half duplex. All data travels in one direction at a time. So if your signal bounces back, it's going to mix with signal that's coming up and cause problems. So corrupt data, we don't want that. So if you have, this is an active terminator. If you do not have an active terminator on your cable, you actually have to jumper the drive for termination. So you'll jumper it for two things. You'll jumper it for device ID, and you would potentially also jumper it for termination. And then the host controller card will be the other end, and that will be jumpered as a terminated end. So signals do not reflect either way. Common uses for SCSI, servers, really, mass storage. But they used to be connected. I saw lots of external CD-ROM drives, and CD-ROM drives were first becoming popular, connected with SCSI. Scanners, and scanners, it's very popular to connect scanners with SCSI because you're pushing a lot of data with a scanner. You're scanning images, and so that was really popular for external SCSI. Zip drives, also very popular. We don't see those anymore. Printers, tape backups. You still see these today. You will still see SCSI tape backups systems, because tape backup systems are very expensive and people do not replace them on a regular basis, and so they are still hanging around with SCSI, and that is perfectly fine. So our upgrade to SCSI. We don't want SCSI anymore. What are we going to use? SAS. All right. So SAS is a beautiful thing. It is a point-to-point technology. No more daisy chaining. You still have device IDs, but the device IDs are hard-coded into the device, into the drive itself. So those, each one has a unique ID, and that's managed by the host controller. We have no termination. It's a point-to-point connection. We don't have to worry about things reflecting back. It's also full duplex. You can have up to 65,535 devices through the use of expanders. That would be a lot, but it is possible. Your transfer speeds are 3 gigabits per second or 6 gigabits per second, depending on which one you chose. You can connect SATA devices to a SAS controller. So you see the SAS controller down here, and you see it's got essentially a SATA connector plug on it. So if you had a SAS controller card and you didn't want to buy SAS drives, you could connect SATA drives to the SAS controller. You cannot connect SAS drives to SATA ports. It doesn't work that way. So you can see the connector difference. I mean, you can see they're very similar, but this obviously takes two separate connectors for SATA, and SAS has just this one big connector that you plug into it. It has a 10-meter cable length. SAS drives, it's called serial attached SCSI. It uses the SCSI command set. It's efficient, it's fast. So once again, this is generally used in servers. You won't really see this in any of your desktop configurations. You wouldn't want to. It's very expensive, but very robust. It had kind of a slow adoption rate because SATA was never very popular. It was known for crashing on a regular basis, but as it's gained more popularity and gained stability, it's not been such an issue anymore. So we are now pretty much using SAS in all of our server mass storage, and SCSI is on its way out. Alright, and I think that pretty much wraps it up for this section. And I will record a couple more sections for you. We'll do I/O, and we will also do partitioning.